Shall we start? Welcome, everybody. We're joining you today to talk about supportive conversations. My name's Sarah Houghton. I'm Head of Learning for Schools and Communities at Place to Be. That means I work with adults who work with children. So my department provides training for adults who work with children, either in school or community settings. And I have a small private practice as a psychotherapist.
Morning everyone, my name is Karen Shine. Excuse me. I'm also Head of Learning alongside Sarah, but I look after what we call our mental health workforce. So my remit in training is upskilling people who are going to be working with children and young people. So I look after all of our professional qualifications trainings for people that eventually want to become a counsellor. And I also look after all of our staff and counsellor on placement training. So anyone that's employed or volunteers with us, we provide a lot of training for them, and I oversee that. And like Sarah, I also work in private practice, but as a supervisor, supervising other counsellors who work generally in schools with children and young people.
So this session is being recorded. We do ask that you don't record it, but the link will be available for you afterwards. I think the link is available afterwards, and we'll make the slides available too. We're going to explore supportive conversations, thinking about how you might speak to your children, but maybe also other children in your life, or even adults that you come across in the workplace. There's a Q&A function at the end, but you can start putting your questions in as they come up if you like during the presentation. I don't know how familiar you are with Zoom, but we can't hear you or see you, which is a very strange experience. But feel free to put something in the Q&A section if you would like to. We might raise some topics that touch on some sensitive points for you, or some tender points. So we do have some sources of emergency support listed at the end if you feel you need that. They might also be useful for you to think about if you are worried about people in your life with mental health difficulties. So we are going to do, Karen's going to start with an introduction to listening, and maybe some of the concerns that you might be having conversations about with your children and young people. I'll cover some of that. Karen's going to talk about listening with empathy, and then we'll give a very short list of some takeaways for you to think about. And we'll have space for some questions and answers at the end. Okay.
Okay, so the title of today's webinar was about holding supportive conversations and listening with empathy. When we think about listening, we do it all the time. You know, it seems a strange topic to have a webinar on, but there's a lot that we do when we're listening, which turns it into active listening, which makes it a more empathic conversation. So this quote here is by Carl Rogers, who is one of the founders of what we call person-centered theory in the counselling world. Sarah and I, by the way, are both qualified counsellors. So what Carl Rogers said about listening is we think we listen, but very rarely do we listen with real understanding and empathy. Yet listening of this very special kind is one of the most potent forces for change that I know. So what we're going to be looking at, or what I'm going to be talking you through a little bit later in the webinar, is we think that we're holding a supportive conversation when someone comes to us and, you know, they're expressing an issue, they're talking about a problem. We think a supportive conversation is one where we walk away having found the solution, fix the problem, and everything's okay. But quite often, you know, people's issues are that they're not being listened to and they don't feel heard. And I'm sure we can all recall a time in our lives where we've had unsatisfactory conversations because actually we just wanted to get our point across and we really wanted to feel heard and understood. But the other person is jumping in quite quickly with solutions or questions and trying to fix. And I know when I've had those conversations, I've come away feeling really dissatisfied and feeling like I haven't been heard or understood. The flip side of that is hopefully that we can all recall a conversation that we've had where someone has really genuinely listened to our views, have been respectful. And again, for me, when I've had those conversations, I feel like I've really been able to express myself and felt very satisfied that I've been heard. So sometimes holding an empathic, supportive conversation is in itself the only solution that's necessary. So what I'm going to talk to you about a little bit later is some of what we call our basic active listening skills. And this will help you feel equipped with how to manage difficult conversations so that you're able to acknowledge the need of the other person and manage the situation a little bit better. So hopefully it feels more beneficial to everyone involved. So we're going to be sharing some skills and some tips for how to have those kind of conversations. I don't have a formula that will tell you exactly what to say in every different situation, but hopefully with some of the skills that we're going to be running through later, you'll feel able to have more challenging or more difficult conversations without shying away from them and feeling more prepared and able to take control of the situation. Thanks, Sarah.
So in putting this presentation together, Karen and I had conversations sort of ranging from, we know that there will be a range of experience amongst you, I was going to say in the room, but in your own rooms. So some of you might have a lot of experience with mental health, some of you might not. Also, you could have you could have children from a range of ages. So what we've tried to do is provide information that would work for any age group. Including if you're also having supportive conversations at work, either with adults or with children. So there's some basic principles around supporting others. I'm going to name a few of the things here that your children might want to be having conversations about. And we know it's not an exhaustive list, and we aren't aiming, as Karen said, to give individual solutions for each one. The principles are listening supportively, and as Karen said, she's going to pick that up. So depending on the age of your child or children, you might be having conversations about some of the following. And in naming them here, our point is not to raise anxiety about all the things that your children could be worried about. It's more to let you know that you aren't alone, and you might already know that from conversations you have with colleagues and family members. But there might be some universal issues that children are dealing with, particularly at the moment, and particularly in relation to the work that you do. And not all of them will apply to you or your children and young people. So younger and preschool children might just be missing a parent who's working extra long hours, or who can't give a hug immediately on coming home, needs to go through a routine of sanitizing before you're able to pick up a child. They might also be missing other family members while you can't mix, while none of us can mix with other families. And it might be that they don't have the language to share that with you, and it's showing up in a different way. So early school age children might have all of the above, and also some worries about school, specifically things around infection within bubbles, or potentially being in a bubble with children of key workers who have different boundaries to other bubbles, so not allowed to mix with their friendship groups. This might happen across all ages of children, worrying about your role and whether you're in particular danger of being infected with COVID. And of course, that has a sort of end result of being worried about you dying, with so much of that in the news. You might be in a family where you have the reality of having lost a member of the family, either to COVID or to something else in the last, in recent history, not just in the last 6 months. And there's been such a loss of the rituals around grieving that some of that support mechanism has not been available for you and your family, and you might all be feeling that. So slightly older, mid-school age children might be asking about all of the above, and also, again, struggles in their friendship groups if they're disrupted by being in different bubbles and not being able to mix with their chosen group of friends. They might be having anxiety about falling behind in their schoolwork, or the disruption to normal routines can be very disturbing to some children, and challenges a real sense of safety for all of us. For older children and young people, it might be that their concerns are really around not getting the grades that they need in order to go to the university that they want to go to, feeling the challenge of restrictions at a time when in their life when they really want to be separating from the family and establishing their own sense of agency, and that this restricted life that we all have is potentially causing them additional frustration. And existing mental health issues that arise during teenage might be being exacerbated by these restrictions. Slightly older young people, maybe you might have children who are planning to go to university, already at university, with all of that sort of anxiety around the isolation that they might be feeling if they've been locked in or locked down. And there's also that sort of understandable sense of resentment at the curtailing of their independence at this time when they should be exploring the world. And that because of the differential in how this COVID impacts people differently in their age group, it can be less impactful to their health. Sorry, I've lost the words there. But they might feel a sense of injustice that they are suffering on behalf of other people. And all of them, as I say, might have an overriding fear for your safety. And this might come out in conversations that they want to have with you. So thinking about having that talk, you know, we set up dynamics in our families that sometimes make it difficult to actually get to the point of something. And sometimes there's a fear that in naming something, we're going to make it worse. And just, Karen and I talked about this also, to name that in the background to this is the additional stress that people who work in healthcare have been under over the last 6 months, or in an already 7 months, in an already very stressful environment. You might be dealing with your own depression or anxiety, PTSD, from what you've seen, what you've been part of, feeling de-skilled in a role that you normally feel really skilled in because it's so new. And you might really be feeling that you're running on empty. And I think we probably all have had days like that. And the challenge for you might be not always feeling ready to talk about difficult things with your children and young people. And you're living with worries for their safety too. So here are a few common fears and just what as a therapeutic approach would say to those. Also on the understanding that it's really hard to reassure anybody when as adults we're also suspended in this period of uncertainty and dealing with what I've just mentioned. So as I say, one of the main fears is that you will make a bad situation worse. Like in talking about this and bringing it to light, I'm going to give it oxygen. But actually by bearing witness to someone else's experience, you are already offering them support. That's listening to an anxiety is one of the greatest gifts. You might feel that it's an area that you're not an expert in and that you'll say the wrong thing or you don't know what to say. Naming that even with your children, when you're so used to having all the answers for them, it can be a relief. So saying, I don't know what to say. It is a really difficult time and I'm not surprised you're worried. I'm not sure what I can say to make it better, so I'm going to listen some more and see if something helpful emerges from what I hear, or what you can tell me. There's also a worry sometimes that they will cry or be angry, depending on what the issue is that they're bringing you. And both of those are coping mechanisms that are sort of an explosion of energy that will run their physiological course. And becoming defensive or trying to stop tears can have an intrusive impact on the person that you're talking to. And with your children, they get the message that it's not okay to cry or not okay to be angry. And both of those are really vital survival mechanisms for us. And actually, for them feeling that their crying is difficult for you to tolerate might mean that they stop using that coping mechanism, or their anger is hard for you to tolerate. So maybe having a response that you have to hand, I can see you're emotional angry. Is there any more you want to share about that? It names that there's an emotion involved, and makes it okay that emotion is there. I hear this a lot, and you might not feel this in your professional lives, but you might feel it more in your personal life, that you can't use a particular word. Like you can't use the word death or suicide. You can't talk about mental health. You can't name self-harm or anxiety, because again, it makes it real. When actually the converse is true. Hearing somebody else say, have you thought about suicide, is containing for somebody. It's like, wow, somebody is here to support me, and that thought that I've had is okay. That might be too difficult to go to, but a useful phrase, certainly that I would use with clients if I was worried about them. And in the initial assessment, I do ask about things like self-harm and suicide. But a useful phrase is, are you worried for your safety or someone else's? And that opens the door for a bigger conversation, because it's a more gentle way of approaching it. And it might be that you're feeling overwhelmed or out of your depth or de-skilled. And this is really a fundamental thing. I think Karen might pick this up later. It's okay, even as parents, not to have all the answers. And actually, sometimes as a child, it's nice to know that your parent is okay with not knowing everything, but that you're willing to explore, that they are the expert on their experience and you can learn from listening to them. Or that you're scared you'll misunderstand a conversation. And in that scenario, it's really important that you clarify what your understanding is. At the moment, I think this is probably one of the most important things. Is one of the greatest gifts to give our children and young people is the ability to go with what is and to tolerate uncertainty and see what solutions emerge. We're suspended in this time where we don't have answers, and being okay with not having answers is a great skill to learn early in life. So a place to be as a children's mental health charity, we think a lot about what behaviour is communicating. Might feel like a little bit of a tangent, but so much of our schooling is devoted to the communication skills of reading and writing. Literacy is prioritised as a form of communication, and increasingly oracy is on the curriculum. So learning how to be a good speaker, a good writer, a good reader. But unless you undertake a specific training, very few of us spend any time learning how to listen. And it's a really strange concept to imagine needing to learn how to listen. But if you think about listening as a whole body experience, which is what a lot of us in our profession, in therapeutic sessions, do, the act of really hearing and listening to somebody can be transformational in itself. That is the basis for therapeutic interventions, is to sit with and listen to another and really hear what their underlying needs are. And thinking about having conversations with children and young people, if we consider that we don't just communicate with words, but out of awareness we read others' body language and other people read ours, we are as humans sensitized to the being state of others. So in supporting other people, it helps to focus on regulating our own physical state first, so that we're in a position to receive information that might not just be through words. That sort of receptive listening is really helpful in supporting others with their challenges, and it's a big part of the psychotherapeutic training that I went through, is to pay attention to how I'm feeling at the same time as in a whole body sense, not just emotionally. And if you are regulated, it helps the other person know that you've got this, is that you're not disturbed by what's going on in this moment. I'm safe with this person. Karen, do you think it's important to go into what the behaviours of others might tell you about their needs? I'm just thinking about time.
Yeah, I think what you said about behaviour as a form of communication, I think is the key point here, really. I mean, particularly with children who don't often have the words or the emotional intelligence to be able to express how they're feeling. So what they'll do is they'll either act out or they'll act in. Children who act out are often the ones that get the most attention because they're just crying out for help, and so their behaviour might alter so that they get noticed. Quite often it alters in a way that isn't constructive. So actually the attention they start receiving is negative attention, and then that can kind of spiral. What we sometimes see is children who are acting in, who become quiet or withdrawn, unexpressive, their social skills start disappearing. It's very easy to miss those children because actually they're just quietly getting on with everything, and they're not crying out for attention. But often those are the children that we really need to pay more attention to, because otherwise they get missed and overlooked and we don't know what's going on. So, as adults, I'm a parent. I know when I'm stressed with work and my child wants something, I can be quite short-tempered and then he'll start misbehaving. But actually what I really need to do sometimes is just take a back seat and say, okay, what is actually going on here? This is not his usual behaviour. So really, why might he be acting like this? Well, let's have a look at what's going on around him. Quite often it's me. But it's important to not react to their behaviour, but to take a step back when you're feeling able to, when you're not feeling stressed or anxious or in the middle of doing something, to be able to take a step back and go, okay, hang on a minute, what might this behaviour be communicating? And how might I respond to that more empathically or more usefully than telling them off?
Thanks, Karen. I didn't intend for you to have to do that. I have some very loud drilling going on in the background, and hopefully it's not disturbing the presentation. So we're going to move now. Karen is going to pick something up, and I'm going to just stop sharing my screen for a moment and play out a film, which hopefully I'll be able to play with the sound. Karen, if you don't hear it, let me know.
Okay. The idea of showing this video is really to introduce the idea of empathy. A lot of people mistake sympathy for empathy. So this is a short video, so I think it's about 2.5 minutes, which will really introduce the idea of empathy versus sympathy. And then I'm going to talk a bit more about that afterwards.
Can you see it, Karen?
Yeah.
So what is empathy? And why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, Not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Thanks, Sarah. So yeah, I wanted to introduce the idea of empathy versus sympathy. And when we are listening empathically, how do we do that? It's very easy for me to talk about listening empathically, but in a moment, I'm going to kind of talk you through, as counsellors, how we listen empathically. But the big difference, as Brené Brown said in that video, is that through empathy, we feel connected with other people. Empathy is about being able to have one foot firmly planted in my world and my other foot with the person that I'm listening to, a foot in their world, a foot in mine and a foot in theirs. Whereas with sympathy, sympathy can often feel a bit patronizing, a bit unhelpful. It doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't always help. Sometimes sympathy is relevant. If you've got a child who's hurt themselves, you poor thing, those kind of things are really helpful. But a genuine empathic connection is what really makes a difference. And Sarah, would you mind going on to the next slide?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've never picked this up before in that Brené Brown clip, but there is an element of over-identification in the, hey, I know what it's like down here, rather than it looks tough down here, which is another way of thinking about it.
In counselling speak, we talk about empathy, sympathy, and over-identification. And what we're striving for is empathy. What we're used to doing in our lives all the time is sympathy and over-identification. Over-identification is the me too. I've been there, I've been through that, I've done that. And that, again, sometimes in certain situations that's helpful, but it's not really what we're aiming for in this webinar to explain. So in order to be an empathic listener, there's certain things that we really need to be paying attention to. We call it active listening, because we are actively doing something while we're listening. We're not sitting back passively. So what am I physically doing when I'm listening to people? Well, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm really going to pay attention. I'm going to look at the person that's talking to me. And if it feels appropriate, I'm going to make eye contact. Now, I say if it feels appropriate because it isn't always appropriate. Some people feel very uncomfortable being under the gaze of others. So with people that find it uncomfortable, I might glance and then glance away. And I will be able to read how comfortable they are under my gaze. So appropriate and relevant eye contact.
Can I just jump in there? Sorry, Karen. I'm just thinking about, for example, your young teenager feeling scrutinized if you sit and give eye contact. And actually sometimes with family members it might be easier to do it in a car or alongside.
Yeah, I have the most useful conversations with my 11-year-old when we're in the car, because he doesn't have to look at me. So you know your children, you know what works best. But if you're sitting kind of in the, as we're seeing in the picture there, if you're sitting having a conversation with someone, it might not be with your children, it might be within a work context, then, you know, think about what's the most comfortable and read the other person. Looking at the other person, observing, gives you a lot of information. Do they sit back when I lean forward? Do they look away? Are they fidgeting? All of that is information about how comfortable or uncomfortable they may be feeling at that moment. So if it feels appropriate, as I say, eye contact. Again, if it's appropriate, stop what you're doing. Sit still. Again, you know, I know if I'm rushing and I am sending a text on my phone whilst listening to my son, I know that I'm only half listening, and I know that he can quite easily tail off with what he's saying, and I just say to him, oh, hang on a minute, let me just finish sending this text and we'll come back to it. But then I've missed that moment. So really what I need to do when I'm listening to someone is I need to put everything down and really pay attention. And even if that's only for 2 or 3 minutes, the experience of really being fully listened to have someone attuning to what I'm saying, is a very powerful experience. And that is not the same if if I'm doing something whilst I'm listening. We talk about this a lot at work. As you know, we work with a lot of schools, and when I work with teachers, what happens quite a lot is they'll tell their children to come and talk to them if they've got a problem. So the child goes to talk to them, and they're sitting there preparing their next lesson whilst listening to the child, their next lesson while listening to the child, and it doesn't work. You know, the child doesn't feel heard, doesn't feel understood, and quite often they'll just drift away. So if possible, just stop what you're doing for those few minutes to really attentively listen. I'll put things down. I'm not fiddling. I'm not playing with something, so that I'm really paying attention to them. What I'm mentally doing when I'm listening is I think about what the person is saying to me. And I try not to think about me, but to think about them. So I'm really focusing on them. I'm really attuning to what they're saying. And I'm not thinking about my response to that. So you know, if someone's talking to me, I am going to have a response, because it's going to touch me if I'm being empathic, because I'm being sensitive. I'm open to that. But what I need to do is put aside my feelings and really focus on the other person. If what they might be saying to me might evoke an emotion in me. So what I'm trying to do mentally is to acknowledge, actually, that's difficult to hear, or that makes me feel really sad that I've said that. I've heard that, sorry. But I'm doing that mentally, and then I'm going to put that to one side, and I'm going to bring my focus back to the person. It's not helpful, it's not supportive or empathic if someone is telling me something that's quite difficult, and I get so caught up in my own emotion that I feel afraid, or I feel emotional, and I start becoming tearful. That's not necessarily helpful to the other person, because again, that might shut them down, because they then feel like they need to take care of me and my emotions. So I need to be able to notice what comes up for me, and then just park it to one side to deal with later. You know, sometimes people are talking and actually it might not be that interesting. So I might drift off and start thinking about, I don't know, what I'm going to cook for dinner, or what what plans I need to make for the weekend. Again, I need to notice that, park it, and bring my focus back to the person that's talking. Not always easy, it's quite a skill, but it's good to practice that. And it's good to, as Sarah mentioned earlier, it's about, if we're going in to have these conversations, we need to be able to regulate ourselves. So, this is something that Sarah's going to talk about later, but it's often about the timing of that conversation. If I've come in from work and I'm incredibly stressed, or feeling like I just need to get in the shower, I need to clean myself, whatever it is, that is not the time that I'm going to be able to mentally attune to the other person and put aside how I'm feeling, because I'm going to be sitting there thinking, I've got to go and get in the shower, I've got to go and put the dinner on. So, in order to mentally listen, mentally attune, we need to be able to be ready to have that conversation. So think about where and when you're having these conversations. So a conversation is a two-way thing. It's not just one person talking, the other person sitting there nodding. So what do I do when it is my turn to speak? One of the most important things to do is just be really clear that you've understood what the other person is trying to say to you. And a really nice way to do that is what we call reflecting and summarizing, as opposed to asking lots of questions. I'm going to talk about questions in a minute and what they can do. But reflecting and summarizing is the skill of being able to just pick up on a few words that the person has said and offer them back to show that actually I've really heard what you were saying. And this shows that I've heard what you're saying. I'm trying to think of an example of that. I'll think of one in a moment. So if Sarah and I were having a conversation about something that happened at work and it was quite a convoluted story, then I might just pick out a few of the key words and reflect them back to Sarah, which would show what I'd understood about it. And then she would have the opportunity to correct me if I'd got it wrong. So it's really about using the other person's words to show that you've understood or to ask for clarification. So to ask for it's important to be able to ask for clarification. So what I might say at that point, if I'm not sure that I've understood, I'll just be very honest and say, I'm not sure that I fully understood when you said blah, blah. Would you mind just saying a little bit more about that so I can understand? It's okay to ask. It's better not to assume and get it wrong. It's better to ask. I'll sometimes summarize what they've said. If someone's told me a long story about something, I'll say, so what I've heard you say is A, B, and C. Is that correct? And when I'm picking up on these words, what I try and do as a counsellor is I try and pick up on the more emotive words. So if someone is telling a long story and in it they said, oh, I was a bit afraid because, you know, this one said this to me in school and then the teacher did this and then that child said that and that one did that. What I'm going to try and come back to is those feeling words to really capture the essence of what's going on. So what I might say then is something like, so I heard you say earlier on that actually you were feeling afraid. Because sometimes the detail of the conversation isn't the most important. The most important is what the feelings are that are being conveyed. The detail, you know, can go on, and I don't need to know that. What I need to know is how my child is feeling and how my child is experiencing something. So I will bring it back to the more feeling words, the more emotive words when I'm reflecting. So when I'm actively listening, those are the kind of cues and words that I'm looking out for so that I can pick up on them when there's a break in the speaker, and I can bring it back to those words to really get to the nub of what's going on. Questions, you know, socially, we're sort of conditioned to ask questions to find out more about people, which is great in a social situation, not always so great when having a supportive conversation. Because if we think about the purpose of questions, quite often the purpose is for my own curiosity. You know, I think it's for my own understanding, but sometimes I'm curious about, well, what did this one say? Or, you know, what did the teacher say when that happened? But actually what I need to do is leave that curiosity to the side and remember that I'm focusing on my child and his experience and not everyone else's. And questions can take us off on a different tangent because I'm questioning what I've heard about, which actually might not be the piece that my child wants to communicate to me. So it's important to try and hold back with questions as much as possible, unless they feel absolutely relevant. And when we are asking questions, to use open questions or to phrase it in a, well, you know, I wonder what was going on for you then, instead of, you know, what were you doing? What were you thinking? Which is probably one of the most unhelpful questions you can ask a child. But a kinder way, a softer way, a more inviting way is to say, well, I was wondering what was going on for you. You know, I wonder what happened just before you had that argument. I wonder what happened before you got sent out the room. So it's a softer, gentler approach rather than kind of bombarding with questions and then going off on a tangent that might not be relevant. the way I encourage a speaker, so if I'm talking, if someone's talking to me, the way that I show that I'm listening is nodding, doing that, yes, I see, I can hear that. Those kinds of little phrases that actually really help the person that's speaking to carry on with what they're saying, because they know that I'm engaged with them. They know that I'm listening by my actions rather than just by my words. We call those encouragers. I'm encouraging the person to carry on. I'm leaning forward, I'm paying attention, I'm, yeah, I can see, I'm nodding, I'm making appropriate eye contact when it feels appropriate. Those are the encouragers that are going to encourage someone to continue to have the conversation with you. What I don't want to do is, in that video you saw Brené Brown talking about the "at least" phrase. So I'm not trying to look for the silver lining in the cloud. I don't want to take away from what someone is expressing to focus on something that's more positive in their lives, when actually they just really need to be with the feeling at the moment. We need to just be with our feelings sometimes in order to work them out and to move on from them. Dismissing them or diminishing them, they don't go away. They're still there. They're just going to come back another time. Or we're going to start acting out if we're not feeling heard or listened to. I'm going to start shouting louder in any way that I can to feel heard. So we want to avoid the kind of diminishing phrases like "at least," "don't worry." You know, it's very easy to say, "Oh, don't worry, it'll all be fine." That can feel, being on the receiving end of that can feel quite dismissive or quite patronizing at times, because it might not all be fine. And I am going to worry, even if you tell me not to. So actually what I would rather hear is, I can hear that you're really worried. I can hear that you're upset about this. Then I feel like I've been got. So the "don't worry," when we think we're being reassuring, it isn't coming across necessarily as reassurance. It's coming across occasionally as being dismissive or patronizing. So just look out for those little easy phrases, the "don't worries," you know, "it'll all be fine, it'll be okay, it'll blow over." Really pay attention to what's being told. The other thing that we can do quite easily, and this is something that Sarah touched on before, is the "me too." You know, "I've been in this hole before, I've been here, I know what you're going through." What we can do when we do that is, that's the over-identification that we mentioned. It can feel like I'm hijacking the conversation. Because what might happen is someone comes to me to tell me their experience of something, and I go, "Do you know what? That happened to me too. And what I did was this, this, and this." Again, I'm now not listening to the person that's speaking, and I'm not focusing on what their experience of it is. Even though I might think I've been in the same situation, it's not going to be exactly the same, and my feelings are going to be different from the person that I'm listening to. So try not to hijack the conversation with the "me too." Try and just really stay with their experience. You can let them know that you understand. You can let them know that you've been in a similar situation and you really want to hear more about their experience of it. So be careful with the dismissive, diminishing, hijacking phrases that are so common and familiar to all of us. And really what we're striving to do is to be with the other person, to be alongside, which is the essence of empathy. It's the being and not the doing. If I'm truly being with another person, I don't often have to do much more than that. The other person will feel heard, they'll feel understood, they'll feel empowered. And from that, they can often be able to come up with what it is they need to do for themselves, rather than me supplying the answer, which in the long run really gives them the skills in life to be able to come up with their own solutions. Being able to really truly be alongside someone, to allow them to express themselves without fear of being judged, without fear of being dismissed, and without fear of being told off, is probably one of the most powerful experiences that children can have, without having to fix it or find a solution for them. Okay, Sarah. I'm just going to run through this very quickly. This is the Chinese symbol for listening. And the reason that we brought it up is I just wanted to demonstrate how much of ourselves we give when we're listening. as I say, we think that we just use our ears to listen, but what this Chinese symbol shows is actually we use so much more. Yes, we are using our ears. That's probably the biggest part of the symbol here. But we're also using our whole self. We're listening with all of our senses. We're using our eyes to observe what's going on. As I said before, really observing the other person while you're listening gives you so much information about how they're feeling. So notice what's going on for the other person as they're talking. They also say there's that expression that eyes are the windows to the soul. So, if I'm able to make eye contact, if it feels appropriate, then actually I might really understand a lot more by being able to look into someone's eyes just for a moment, to be able to hold that gaze for a moment. And I'm giving them my undivided attention. Like I say, I'm not thinking about, what I'm making for dinner tonight, or, what I'm doing at the weekend. I'm really focusing on them. I'm using my whole self to focus. And the reason the heart there is if I'm listening genuinely with empathy, I'm using my heart. I'm really putting aside my feelings, my thoughts, my judgments at that moment to really sit in the other person's world with them for a little while. And I do that with true, genuine empathy, which is where the heart comes in. So it's interesting that the Chinese have such a large symbol for one word, and it really encompasses everything that we do when we're actively and empathically listening. Thanks, Sarah.
So we're coming to the end now and just sort of thinking about things for you to take away. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground. And some of it is, I think, asking a lot of parents, particularly parents who are doing really challenging work, long days, coming back, being tired, running on empty, being quite burnt out. Our first top tip is really regulate yourself first. Give yourself the best opportunity to have a good conversation. And that might mean saying, now is not the time, because I'm angry, and I'm not angry at you. But it might feel like that if we have this conversation now. So give me 10 minutes to just decompress, and I will be with you and give you my full attention. We think that we're really good at hiding our emotions, but as I mentioned earlier, our body language absolutely gives us away so much of the time. And if you are very anxious about something, the people around you might not know it in their own awareness, but they will be picking up some of that anxiety from you in the way that your body is dysregulated. And ways that you can regulate yourself are to breathe. That is the most fundamental support system our body has. So really giving yourself a few good in and out breaths and noticing whether you're breathing just in the top of your chest or breathing all the way into your stomach, and how high are your shoulders, because your child will see that if you're having a conversation. We could do an hour on self-regulation, we could do a week on self-regulation, but think about how your being state and your readiness to have a conversation. And it might be that it's not perfect, but that you can have 3 breaths before you have to have a conversation that is challenging. Be led by the person who needs to talk to you. And if it's your child, we know that there are additional complications in that your fears for their safety may come into play, but to really hear them, sometimes you need to put that aside and just let them speak their experience to you. Reflecting back and naming something, as we've both said, can help to contain an issue. It's one of the fundamentals of therapeutic settings. And I think this goes for children, for adults. Don't think that it's your job to find a solution by yourself. That is an incredible task we set ourselves, and it shifts a power differential. Like it makes us seem like we are always in control and always have the power to fix things. And actually, it's hard to be alongside somebody when we're also going, have you tried this? Have you tried that? I know it happened to me quite recently with one of my best friends who I was sharing some concerns with, and she said, without meaning to, have you tried this, have you tried that? And I noticed myself shut down. So think about also the impact on you when you experience something like that, in a way that might help you understand how that can feel to another person and to a child, where it's your job to have all the answers. Sometimes the job just needs to take a back seat. If it's a really serious conversation that you have and something is raised that you weren't aware of or that you were afraid of, it's really important not to just have the conversation once, but to find a way to follow up. So if a child says something to you that is disturbing, you find a way to come back to it, even if it's uncomfortable for you. Certainly with older children, if they say they're struggling and they're depressed and feel really isolated, it's not enough just to have that conversation once. It doesn't mean that you have to find a therapist or a solution immediately, but that the conversation stays open. That it's like, yep, great, I heard you, back to your isolation. Yes, it can bring all kinds of questions about our own talents as parents, as humans, as co-workers. But that is us, and we need to put that to one side. We're going to have some questions and answers questions in time for some questions. But just quickly, I think we might be able to share the slides. And these are, if you or anybody you know is struggling, these are places where you can go for support. Shout in particular is very good for a generation who have grown up using mobile phones, and that is a great source of connection for them, and they understand that as a communication. They can access text support 24 hours. It's like the Samaritans, but via text. Samaritans are always there. And Kooth is an online mental health community, which young people are finding very supportive. And we at Place to Be, we've worked with both Shout and Kooth on supporting their growth. So are there any questions? I don't think I can see.
I've just seen a comment from Victoria asking about whether we've got any webinars about play skills or basic introduction to children's counselling. We don't have any webinars planned for that. We do run what we call taster days at Place to Be, which are, if you're interested in children's counselling, if you're interested in working therapeutically with a child without being a counsellor, then the best thing I would suggest is to come on one of our taster days where we introduce the idea of play therapy, and we work experientially on the taster days to actually do some exercises to understand what it's like to actually play with children and how we engage with them in a more therapeutic way rather than just in a more playful, it is playful, but in a more kind of parental or friend way, how we look at the play through a therapeutic lens. Saying that, we're about to put some of our taster day material online. That will be available in January. At the moment, it's all face-to-face. But also, if it's something that there was a lot of interest in, then we could look at developing a webinar for it. So please do write in and let us know if that's something that you would like.
Thanks, Karen. We've been told recently that you need to leave 40 seconds for questions. I'm not sure if that is also true when it's a written question, and we won't leave you for 40 seconds.
Actually, there's another comment here. Thank you. Talking about identification. Yeah, I think we're all guilty of that. I think, you know, it's fine in a social situation. We're all programmed to do that. It's how we connect with other people. It's how we find similarities, which we're all looking for to make that connection. But in a more empathic or therapeutic way, it can hijack the conversation, and that isn't what we're there to do.
Great. Thanks, Elaine, for your comment. Yes, yes. It's natural, and until we feel it from the other side, but we don't necessarily articulate it until we have it pointed out to us. Thank you for that. I don't know if Whitney's still there. She's seen us do similar things many times, so doesn't necessarily stay with us. Any good resources you can recommend to read further on this? Oh, that's a really good question.
If you're interested in looking at therapeutic play skills, I can recommend, he's American, a man called Gary Landreth. And if you Google him, there are some YouTube videos of him doing play therapy. He's not who I would choose to demonstrate, but he's probably one of the best ones that's online. And he's got some books, some really easy books to read about an introduction to play therapy, working with children. So he's a good way in.
It's not clear, Mark, whether you're asking about play skills or about supportive conversations. If you haven't already looked at some of Brene Brown's stuff, I think that's from a much longer piece about empathy. She does, there's a great TED talk on vulnerability and one on shame, which they're just really good things to know as human beings. And can support you have good conversations. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. We've drawn we've drawn a lot of this from a lot of therapeutic training. Personally, I think reading around shame, and this is academic reading, but Gordon Wheeler has written a lot about shame. And maintaining connection around shame, and that because there is stigma associated with mental health, sometimes shame is in the room when you're talking about it. So that would be one place for me to start. And maintaining connection is the antidote to shame. So even if you're feeling it, being able to stay connected to your child if they are feeling it. Will support you. Have we done all the Q&As?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I've got a 12-year-old grandson who is very mischievous, naughty, and I'm really worried. Any good resources that I can get more help? I think it really, that's a very difficult question to answer without knowing the child. And if there's real concern in the family, obviously we would recommend going to a GP to think about whether you need to get support. But maybe think about what he's trying to communicate. Is there something going on for him that he is finding it difficult to articulate? So that's probably where I would start.
It's a difficult age to have a conversation. As I say, my son is a similar age and he's sort of striving for that independence and freedom now and doesn't want to sit and talk to me. The best way I find is to do an activity with him that he enjoys, even if it means that we're sitting watching a TV program together, and I'll find ways throughout the TV program to interject with, well, what do you think? What would you do in that situation? I need to kind of step into his world in order to be able to have that conversation with him, rather than trying to get him to step into my world, my adult world. You know, where I can, I might sit down on the floor and play a game with him if he'll let me. And again, you know, once we're playing, sort of sitting alongside each other, then there's an opportunity to connect in another way. So try and step into his world in order to be able to connect with him. That's the first thing that I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, it might be as simple as, is he having enough physical activity in this time of lockdown? And work with the school, see if it's just happening at home. We have play resources on our website, which are actually from the art room directed at parents with activities to do with children and young people. there's also some more targeted to schools, but you might have a look. Placetobe.org.uk. That's place to be, and the 2 as our logo says. I'm just going to share my screen again so that I can share those links. Yeah, so there are ways that you can contact us and find out more about what we offer. Elaine, I would definitely speak to the school if it's something that you're really concerned about. Karen, did we answer? Can you remind the difference between sympathy and empathy?
Yes, empathy is being alongside. One foot in my world, one foot in their world. I'm sitting with them in their world and I'm experiencing some of what they're expressing to me. Sympathy is more of the, oh, you poor thing, that sounds awful, which doesn't really allow the other person to feel like they've been really understood. So sympathy can sometimes feel quite patronizing. Sympathy often implies feeling sorry for someone. Empathy is more about really being able to get how they feel and to offer that space where they feel heard and understood and really got.
Something that I use quite a lot with clients, and it's not like it's a stock phrase, but it's something that I feel quite often is, you are in a tough spot. Like, that sounds really difficult where you are right now. And that means that I don't go, I know how that feels, or it's recognizing their position. And so you might want to introduce similar phrases into your responses.
That sounds like a difficult situation is one of my stock phrases as well. And I'm starting a sentence with, I'm wondering, I'm wondering how that feels. I wonder what that was like. Maybe you could tell me a bit more. Those kind of phrases are more empathic.
And it might feel like a shift in in the existing relationships that you have. And people might be a little bit weird, like what's going on here? Why are you taking this tone with me? But actually it takes practice, and it builds your skill in it over time. So I think we're over time now, and I see some people have left because we've run over. So please do go to our website if you have further questions and want to see some resources. Get in contact with us. Hopefully you've signed up for some. I think Paul is doing a webinar tomorrow about recovery and self-care. Hopefully you get a chance to see that either live or recorded. And that's it. Thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you, everyone. Take care now. Bye-bye.